November 17, 1942, Luftwaffe Forward Base, Stalingrad region. Oberst Wilhelm Müller paced the cramped underground briefing room, his expression grim in the flickering light of kerosene lamps. 30 officers sat in rigid attention, dark circles under their eyes betraying 4 consecutive nights of interrupted sleep. Supply depots in 3 sectors had reported mysterious explosions. Ammunition trains failed to arrive. Field hospitals reported increasing cases of combat fatigue due to relentless nocturnal disturbances. Muller slammed his fist on the wooden table, rattling empty schnapps glasses from the previous night's consolations. "Gentlemen, this night witch nonsense ends now," Muller sneered, prompting knowing chuckles throughout the room. "Moscow has become so desperate they're sending women in crop dusters to harass the Reich's finest. Women, flying museum pieces that belong in a circus, not a war." Hauptmann Dieter Krause raised his glass in mock toast. "To the Soviet High Command, who sends schoolgirls in wooden coffins to fight the Luftwaffe." Raucous laughter filled the bunker. Another officer added, "Those pathetic POWs can barely carry 2 small bombs. What next? Throwing rocks?" The room erupted in laughter again as Muller assured them these amateur tactics would cease within weeks once winter properly set in. "No woman could endure open cockpits in Russian winter," he declared confidently. What Muller didn't know was that at that exact moment, the 588th Night Bomber Regiment was already airborne, having completed 371 of their eventual 24,000 missions. The wooden biplanes, dismissed as toys by German commanders, were silently approaching Muller's position from 3 vectors. Among them was Nadezhda Popova, a 21-year-old who had already survived 17 direct hits to her aircraft. Tonight's mission would be her 271st, during which she would drop over half a ton of bombs directly onto the fuel depot adjacent to Müller's bunker. By morning, the Luftwaffe commander would lose 6 aircraft to fuel shortages, and within 48 hours, his confidence would transform into bewilderment as he attempted to explain to High Command how women in wooden training planes had managed to demolish a heavily defended German position while flying without parachutes or radios, in temperatures that froze exposed skin within minutes. German night air defense doctrine, perfected since 1939, left no room for improvisation. Each requirement emerged from hard lessons paid in blood. During the Battle of Britain, Luftwaffe pilots suffered 18% casualties from hypothermia alone, leading to mandatory enclosed cockpits on all combat aircraft. After 17 mid-air collisions in a single month over the Eastern Front, radio communication became non-negotiable for all-night operations. Analysis of downed aircraft revealed that 30% of pilot fatalities could have been prevented with proper parachute deployment, making them standard equipment. Most critically, speed requirements established 180 mph as the absolute minimum for combat aircraft after slow bombers proved catastrophically vulnerable to Soviet interceptors. The Junkers Ju-88 night fighter embodied these principles perfectly. 300 mmRTM per top speed, crew of 4, Fuji 220 Liechtenstein radar capable of detection at 5,000 meters, and twin Jumo 211J engines generating 2,400 horsepower. Between 1940 and 1942, these aircraft had destroyed 357 British bombers. German confidence wasn't mere arrogance. It was built upon technological superiority proven repeatedly in combat conditions across multiple theaters. While German engineers perfected these requirements, Nadezhda Popova and her regiment were systematically proving them irrelevant. On the night of October 8, 1942, as Popova approached a German artillery position near Mozdok, her Po-2 biplane violated every established Luftwaffe principle. She flew without radio, maintaining formation through hand signals illuminated by the dim glow of her instrument panel. No parachute weighed down her aircraft. At altitudes below 400 meters, they served no purpose beyond false comfort. Her maximum speed of 94 mph made her half as fast as what Germans considered suicidally slow. Yet mission number 267 of her journey toward 24,000 regimental sorties succeeded brilliantly. 4 100-kilo bombs dropped manually destroyed 7 artillery pieces. German command initially dismissed the incident as lucky amateurism, unaware they were witnessing the beginning of one of the most effective harassment bombing campaigns in military history, all conducted without a single parachute to save the women who flew night after night. The Soviet response violated every principle German doctrine established as fundamental to air combat survival. The Polikarpov PO2 biplane was mockingly called flying kindling, or plywood with wings, by German pilots. Its open cockpit exposed pilots to temperatures reaching -40 degrees, causing severe frostbite on exposed facial skin and forming ice crystals on eyelashes that had to be broken away to maintain vision. Equipment considered absolutely essential by German standards simply didn't exist. No radios meant navigation and coordination through visual signals only. No parachutes, deemed pointless at low operational altitudes, saved weight but eliminated any survival chance if seriously damaged. No armor plating left pilots completely exposed to even small arms fire from below. The specifications comparison was laughable on paper. 94 mph maximum speed versus the Ju-88's 300 mph. A single M11 engine generating 100 horsepower compared to the German fighter's 2,400 horsepower. An airframe designed in 1928, often older than the women flying it. Production cost of approximately $5,000 against the Ju-88's $80,000. Manufacturing time of 3 weeks versus 3 months. The absurdity reached its peak with the weapons system. Women flying wooden trainer aircraft converted to bombers, dropping explosives by hand through a hole in the floor, using only a basic aiming sight. What German engineers saw as fatal weaknesses, Nadezhda Popova transformed into advantages through tactical innovation. The PO2's canvas and wooden construction meant bullets often passed through without hitting vital systems. During her 299th mission, Popova returned with 42 bullet holes across her wings and fuselage, yet remained airborne. A German 20mm round had passed directly between her and her navigator, penetrating both canvas sides without detonating. She later remarked to her squadron, "If I'd been flying one of their metal coffins, that bullet would have ricocheted until it found me." Germans designed aircraft to fight their war. We designed tactics to fight ours. The simplicity of the PO2 allowed her regiment to achieve their 24,000 missions through rapid turnaround. Refueling took 4 minutes, rearming barely 3, while German bombers required extensive maintenance after each sortie. Night Witch pilots frequently completed 8 missions per night. When adding up total sorties, the mathematics became clear. Simplicity multiplied impact far beyond what German analysis predicted possible. An official Luftwaffe technical assessment from November 30, 1942, concluded, "The Soviet deployment of female pilots in obsolete training aircraft represents a desperate measure indicating critical shortages in both qualified flight personnel and manufacturing capacity for modern combat aircraft. The wooden construction and primitive equipment render these aircraft extremely vulnerable to all forms of defensive measures. Physics remains immutable. Superior speed, metallic construction, and modern avionics will inevitably defeat slower, wooden, obsolete aircraft. We predict these operations will cease within 4 to 6 months due to unsustainable attrition rates. Our calculations demonstrate overwhelming superiority in all measurable categories: a 3.1 speed ratio advantage, 24.1 horsepower differential, and 15.1 cost efficiency favoring our aircraft. While the current harassment operations create temporary morale impacts through sleep disruption, they pose no serious operational threat to supply lines or command infrastructure. Recommendation: monitor but allocate no special countermeasures beyond existing night defense protocols." This assessment carried the full authority of Reichsluftfahrt Ministerium and represented the consensus of Germany's premier aeronautical engineers. It was wrong. While German High Command dismissed the threat, Nadezhda Popova was systematically dismantling their supply infrastructure one railway junction at a time. On December 12, 1942, the night the assessment reached field commanders, she executed her 331st mission, destroying an ammunition train near Rostov that had been carefully camouflaged against conventional bombing. By this point, the regiment had conducted over 7,200 missions, rapidly approaching the 24,000, that would eventually make them one of the most effective night bombing units in military history. German logistics officers recorded unexplainable losses that contradicted the assessment's dismissive conclusions. Yet the fundamental misunderstanding continued. The wooden aircraft, flying without parachutes, were accomplishing what mathematical models deemed impossible. The Germans had made a fatal calculation error that no amount of engineering brilliance could overcome. Their logic seemed sound. Ju-88 at 300 mph versus Po-2 at 94 mph created a 3.2x speed advantage that should have translated to easy interception and destruction. What they critically overlooked was that effective interception requires matching speed, not just exceeding it. This created an aerodynamic paradox centered around stall speeds, the minimum speed an aircraft must maintain to generate sufficient lift to remain airborne. The Ju-88 would stall at approximately 120 mph, meaning it would literally fall from the sky if it flew any slower. The POW-2 operated comfortably at 80 mph and could glide effectively at 60 mph with engines at minimum power. The Night Witches were flying below the German minimum survivable speed, creating an impossible scenario. German pilots must either fly past too fast to engage effectively, or slow down and risk catastrophic stall. This paradox manifested in a documented incident on September 14, 1942, near Stalingrad. Hauptmann Werner Schmidt detected a PO2 formation and attempted interception. He reduced speed to 130 mph, while the Soviet pilots immediately throttled to 70 mph glide. Schmidt's aircraft began showing stall warnings, forcing him to abort the engagement. His after-action report simply stated, "Target speed below minimum engagement threshold," a technical admission of the fundamental flaw in German air doctrine when confronting the Night Witches. Understanding this physics made Nadezhda Popova virtually untouchable in numerous engagements. During her 412th mission, she detected the approach of a German night fighter by the moonlight glinting off its canopy. Immediately, she throttled to minimum power and descended to just 200 meters above the ground. The German pilot made 3 separate passes, overshooting each time as Popova maintained her impossibly slow speed. On the final attempt, the German aircraft approached its stall speed, its wings visibly wobbling as the pilot desperately tried to maintain control while slowing enough to line up a shot. Forced to abandon the engagement or crash, the German climbed away. This tactic, repeated across her regiment's 24,000 missions without parachutes, proved the PO2's slowness was its greatest weapon. German engineers calculated thrust, weight, speed, firepower. They calculated everything except one variable. You cannot intercept what flies slower than your minimum speed, and the Night Witches flew slower than physics allowed Germans to chase. The stall speed paradox that had already frustrated German pilots was only the first of 3 advantages the Night Witches possessed. Advantages that defied conventional military wisdom. German fighters had been meticulously optimized for intercepting fast Soviet bombers like the Il-4 and PE-2, which cruised at speeds exceeding 250 mph. The Ju-88 and Bf-110 night fighters were designed to chase and overtake, not to match slow-moving targets. This created a fundamental physics problem that German engineers had never anticipated. Their aircraft were physically incapable of flying below certain speeds. At 300 mph cruising speed, overshooting a slow target was mathematically inevitable. Slowing to 150 mph brought their aircraft dangerously close to the 120 mph stall threshold, where wings no longer generated sufficient lift. The POW-2 biplanes, operating comfortably at 80 mph and capable of sustained glides at 60 mph, created an untouchable zone. German pilots, trained for high-speed pursuit tactics, found themselves attempting precision slow-speed engagements their aircraft simply couldn't perform. At speed differentials exceeding 200 mph, German gunners had approximately 2 to 3 seconds of weapons lock opportunity before inevitably overshooting their target, a near impossible task even for the most skilled pilots. On January 23, 1943, during her 378th mission, Nadezhda Popova demonstrated this advantage with lethal precision. Approaching a German fuel depot near Krasnodar, she detected the distinctive engine note of a Bf-110 night fighter vectoring toward her position. Her immediate response, throttle back to minimum power, reducing her airspeed to barely 65 mph. The German pilot made 4 separate passes, each time roaring past her position with guns blazing but missing by wide margins. On his final attempt, his desperate efforts to slow enough for a clean shot were visible even in the darkness, his aircraft's wings wobbling precariously as he approached stall speed. Unable to match her glacial pace without falling from the sky, the German pilot aborted the intercept. During those 4 failed passes, Popova adjusted course directly toward her primary target, released her bombs precisely on the fuel storage tanks, and departed as explosions illuminated the night sky behind her. By this point, Mission 378 of her regiment's eventual 24,000, the tactic had been refined to near perfection. The German pilot's after-action report contained a simple, frustrated conclusion. Target evasion successful due to insufficient minimum engagement velocity. The second advantage emerged from what Germans considered the PO2's greatest vulnerability: its primitive construction materials. The physics of bullet impacts created an unexpected paradox. When bullets struck a metal aircraft, they penetrated the aluminum skin, creating deadly shrapnel, then ricocheted inside the fuselage, likely striking fuel lines, hydraulic systems, or crew members. German ammunition had been specifically designed for these metal targets: explosive rounds and incendiary tracers that would tear through aluminum and ignite internal components. Even armor-piercing rounds wasted most of their energy penetrating non-existent armor. In contrast, when bullets hit a canvas aircraft, they simply passed through the fabric, exited the other side, and continued into empty air. Little energy transferred to the airframe, no shrapnel was created, and secondary damage rarely occurred. The wooden frame components would sustain clean holes, unless a bullet directly struck a critical structural spar. The PO2's vital systems, engine, fuel tank, and crew, occupied a remarkably small percentage of the aircraft's volume, creating a statistical advantage against random fire. Even substantial canvas tears had minimal effect on the biplane's already modest aerodynamics. Most critically, battlefield repairs could be completed in minutes. A canvas patch applied in 30 minutes versus metal welding requiring specialized equipment and hours of work. German pilots increasingly reported the frustrating experience. Bullets passed through target without observable effect. During her 412th mission on April 3, 1943, Nadezhda Popova proved this advantage definitively when her aircraft encountered concentrated anti-aircraft fire over a German artillery position near Novorossiysk. Upon landing, ground crews counted 73 distinct bullet holes across her aircraft, 42 in the wings alone, 17 through the fuselage, and 14 scattered across the tail surfaces. Miraculously, not a single round had struck any critical component. One bullet had passed directly between her and her navigator, puncturing both sides of the cockpit without hitting either woman. Her maintenance crew chief reportedly stood in stunned silence before simply stating, "The laws of probability no longer apply to you." After 35 minutes of hasty canvas patching, the aircraft was deemed airworthy. Popova flew 4 more missions that night in the same damaged aircraft, bringing her closer to the regiment's eventual 24,000 sorties. When a visiting Soviet general later inquired about the incident, Popova responded with characteristic understatement. "In their metal coffins, I would have been dead after the first bullet. In our canvas Ghost, 73 bullets meant only that our maintenance crew worked an extra hour that night." But the third advantage proved most devastating to German morale: the Night Witch's mastery of acoustic warfare. German searchlight and anti-aircraft artillery systems relied heavily on acoustic detection during night operations. Sound-ranging equipment triangulated engine noise to direct searchlights and targeting systems. The standard procedure followed a predictable sequence: hear approaching engines, activate searchlights to illuminate targets, commence anti-aircraft fire, and if necessary, scramble night fighters to intercept. The Night Witches discovered a tactic, possibly accidentally at first, that rendered this entire system ineffective. They would approach at 8,000 feet with engines at full throttle, deliberately alerting German sound detection equipment. When German searchlights activated and began sweeping the sky, the Night Witches would cut their engines completely at around 3,000 feet, gliding in total silence toward their targets for 5 to 6 minutes. They would drop their bombs before the Germans realized aircraft were directly overhead, only restarting their engines after bombs had exploded and confusion reigned below. The physics made this possible. The PO2's glide ratio of approximately 110 meant they lost only 1 foot of altitude for every 10 feet of forward travel. From 3,000 feet, this provided nearly 30,000 feet of silent gliding distance, about 5.6 miles, at a glide speed of 60 mph. During these silent approaches, the only sound was wind rustling through canvas wings, easily masked by ground noise. The psychological effect on German troops was devastating: hearing engines, preparing defenses, then experiencing explosions from an apparently empty sky. On the night of August 12, 1943, Nadezhda Popova used this silent approach on 11 consecutive missions, setting the pattern for what would eventually become thousands of the regiment's 24,000 total sorties. On her 7th mission that night, her target was a German regimental headquarters near Kuban. that had been relocated 3 times previously to evade Soviet bombing. Approaching with engines deliberately loud, she watched German searchlights activate and begin their familiar patterns. At precisely 2,800 feet, she cut her engine completely and began a silent descent toward the target. For 4 minutes, her aircraft drifted ghost-like above German positions. The silence was so complete that she could hear German soldiers calling to each other below. "Where are the planes? I can't hear them anymore." Their searchlights swept frantically across empty sky sectors while she glided directly overhead, invisible in the darkness. She released her bombs directly above the command building while Germans were still looking in the wrong direction. The explosions illuminated their upturned faces, still searching the empty sky for aircraft they couldn't see or hear. She restarted her engine only after clearing the target area, the sound now masked by the chaos of explosions behind her. "We were ghosts they couldn't fight," she later told new pilots joining the regiment. "They feared the silence more than the bombs. When Germans heard our engines stop, they knew death was gliding toward them, but they couldn't determine from where." German technical superiority on paper meant nothing in operational reality, where mission effectiveness was measured in targets destroyed, not engineering specifications. The Junkers Ju-88 night fighter boasted impressive credentials: 300 men up top speed, twin engines generating 2,400 horsepower, advanced radar systems, secure radio communications, armored crew compartments, and 4 highly trained specialists on board. Each aircraft cost approximately $80,000, equivalent to $1.3 million in 2025, required 3 months to build, demanded skilled labor for both construction and maintenance, and represented the pinnacle of precision German manufacturing. Yet these technical marvels achieved an operational tempo of only 1-2 sorties per night maximum. Between missions, each aircraft required 3 to 4 hours of comprehensive systems checks, refueling, rearming, and crew rest periods. The crew themselves, pilot, navigator, radar operator, and gunner, experienced rapid fatigue coordinating complex tasks in a high-stress environment. The average Ju-88 night fighter completed only 40 to 60 missions before being lost or having its crew rotated due to combat stress. Despite their technical sophistication, these aircraft maintained merely a 60% survival rate, with many losses attributed to weather, navigation errors, and mechanical failures rather than enemy action. In stark contrast, the PO-2 biplanes with their primitive specifications, 94 mph maximum speed, 100 horsepower engines, no radar, no radios, no armor, and a crew of 2, achieved results that defied statistical prediction. Each aircraft cost roughly $5,000, could be built in 3 weeks with minimal skilled labor, and required basic maintenance accessible to mechanics with limited technical training. Their operational tempo shattered German expectations. 8-18 sorties per night were standard practice. Maintenance between missions required merely 7 minutes total, 4 minutes for refueling and 3 minutes for reloading bombs. The 2-woman crews developed extraordinary coordination after hundreds of missions together, using simple hand signals and predetermined protocols to eliminate the need for electronic communications. The average night witch completed between 800 to 1,000 missions during her service, with a survival rate of 96.8%, losses coming almost exclusively from ground fire rather than fighter interception. This created the central paradox of the air war. More expensive, sophisticated aircraft yielded lower operational effectiveness, while simpler, cheaper aircraft produced higher operational effectiveness. The German advantage in technology became a decisive disadvantage in logistics and sustainability. These statistics were embodied in Nadezhda Popova's operational record on the night of September 25, 1943, when she completed 15 consecutive missions between 2200 hours and 0530 hours the following morning. Each mission cycle required approximately 25 minutes, flying to target, bombing, returning, refueling, reloading, and launching again. Her ground crew achieved such efficiency that they could prepare her aircraft faster than she could walk from debriefing to the cockpit for her next sortie. During those 15 missions, she dropped 1,500 kilograms of bombs, striking German positions including 2 ammunition dumps, 3 barracks complexes, 1 vehicle park, and multiple artillery positions. German casualties that night were estimated at over 60 killed, with significant material losses. The most accomplished Luftwaffe night fighter pilot, by comparison, had never exceeded 4 sorties in a single night. "I've lost count," she reportedly told her squadron commander at sunrise. but I believe that puts me at mission 873. That placed her on track toward the regiment's eventual 24,000 missions, a number that was becoming legendary even among German soldiers who increasingly feared the night sky despite their overwhelming technological superiority during daylight hours. Wehrmacht logistics officers were recording a disturbing pattern in their resource allocation reports by late 1943. The expenditure attempting to stop the night witches had reached staggering proportions. Over 2 million anti-aircraft artillery rounds had been fired specifically at the Women's Regiment. At approximately 50 Reichsmarks per AA shell, this represented 100 million Reichsmarks, roughly $40 million USD at wartime exchange rates, expended against aircraft worth a fraction of that amount. German fighters had conducted more than 1,000 dedicated intercept attempts, each sortie costing roughly 500 Reichsmarks in fuel, maintenance, and ammunition, adding another 500,000 Reichsmarks to the total. Over 200 searchlight batteries had been deployed specifically for night defense against these harassment raids, requiring personnel and equipment diverted from other critical sectors. In total, more than 5,000 German soldiers were assigned to counter night harassment operations, personnel who could not be deployed elsewhere. The total German cost exceeded 150 million Reichsmarks dedicated to stopping the night witches. Meanwhile, the Soviet investment in the 588th Night Bomber Regiment represented economic warfare at its most efficient. 40 PO-2 aircraft at approximately $5,000 each represented a $200,000 investment. The bombs dropped cost a fraction of the defensive ammunition fired against them. Personnel requirements were minimal. 80 pilots and navigators with a ground crew of about 150 total support staff. The entire regiment represented less than $2 million USD in Soviet resources. The cost ratio was staggering. Germans were spending at a 25.1 ratio trying to stop what the Soviets had created. The effectiveness metric was even more damning. Despite this massive expenditure, Germans achieved 0 confirmed fighter kills against the night witches. The result was a textbook example of asymmetric warfare, minimal investment producing maximum enemy resource drain while maintaining combat effectiveness. Nadezhda Popova personally represented this asymmetric efficiency in human form. If Germans fired an average of 1,000 rounds attempting to hit her aircraft per mission, her 873 confirmed missions by late 1943 meant 873,000 rounds fired directly at her, a cost of approximately 43.7 million Reichsmarks spent trying to kill one woman. The result, she survived to fly again the next night. Her bombs had destroyed an estimated 75 vehicles, 6 ammunition dumps, 4 command posts, and dozens of artillery positions, inflicting casualties conservatively estimated at 400 German personnel. The value of German material destroyed through her direct action exceeded 30 million Reichsmarks. For comparison, the average United States Army Air Force's bomber crew rotated home after completing 25 missions, considering this the maximum sustainable combat exposure. Popova had already completed the equivalent of 35 full American tours of duty. With no rotation, no leave, and no parachute, she represented more combat sorties than entire squadrons of German night fighters had flown on the Eastern Front. Her contribution to the regiment's eventual 24,000 missions made her one of the most cost-effective weapons in the Soviet arsenal, a mathematical reality that was becoming impossible for German command to ignore. German high command was beginning to realize that killing women in wooden biplanes was costing more than those women were costing the Soviets. And Nadezhda Popova had no intention of stopping. As German high command grappled with the resource drain, frontline intelligence was about to deliver a shocking revelation that would transform their understanding of the night harassment operations. On February 12, 1943, near Krasnodar, a PO-2 biplane suffered engine failure while returning from a bombing run against a German fuel depot. The aircraft was forced to land behind German lines where Feldgendarmerie units quickly captured the crew. Hauptmann Klaus Müller, the interrogation officer assigned to the case, arrived expecting to process 2 more Soviet airmen. When the prisoners were brought into the makeshift interrogation center, a requisitioned schoolhouse, they still wore their flight helmets and bulky winter gear, masking their features. Standard procedure dictated removal of headgear during questioning. As the helmets came off, Müller found himself staring at 2 young women. The prisoners are identified as Lieutenant Olga Sanfirova and Navigator Maria Smirnova, 588th Night Bomber Regiment. His initial report stated, both female, ages 22 and 20. They claim to have conducted 317 and 298 missions respectively. Prisoners show no signs of fear or willingness to cooperate beyond providing basic information. They maintain that their entire regiment consists exclusively of female personnel. Initially considered this disinformation intended to confuse our intelligence, but documentation recovered from the aircraft supports their claims. Request immediate guidance on handling female combatants in non-medical military roles. Miller's report reached Battalion Commander Major Heinrich Brandt later that day. Brandt initially dismissed it as Soviet propaganda, suggesting the women were being used for a single publicity mission. 3 days later, however, a similar report arrived from a sector 80 kilometers distant. Another PO2 shot down, another female crew captured. By February 18th, 5 separate reports from different sectors confirmed the same pattern. Brandt escalated the information to division headquarters, marking it urgent, requires verification. Division intelligence officers cross-referenced serial numbers from downed aircraft with raids reported over the previous 6 months. The pattern was undeniable. The same aircraft had been appearing in raid reports across multiple sectors, conducting hundreds of sorties. By March 1st, the information had reached Army Group South headquarters, where General Ewald von Kleist received a comprehensive briefing. "The evidence is conclusive, Herr General," the intelligence officer stated, presenting captured logbooks, identity papers, and photographs. The 508th Night Bomber Regiment is composed entirely of female personnel, pilots, navigators, mechanics, and support staff. They have been operational since June 1942, conducting what we estimate to be over 8,000 missions to date. The room of senior officers sat in stunned silence. We have verified that the same aircraft identification numbers appear repeatedly in raid reports dating back months. The conclusion is unavoidable. Women are responsible for the night harassment campaigns that have cost us millions in resources and hundreds of casualties. And the revelation created a crisis within Wehrmacht command structure that rippled from frontline units to Berlin. The initial reaction among senior officers was categorical disbelief. "This is impossible," declared Luftwaffe General Wolfgang Martini. Women lacked the physical stamina and psychological fortitude for sustained combat operations. Others demanded more evidence, refusing to accept the intelligence at face value. As verification continued to accumulate, disbelief transformed into humiliation. Elite Luftwaffe pilots who had prided themselves on their superior training and equipment had been repeatedly outmaneuvered by women flying what were essentially crop dusters. Beyond the personal affront, the revelation presented a significant propaganda problem. How could the regime explain to the German public and troops that women in primitive aircraft were effectively harassing the supposedly invincible Wehrmacht? The ideological implications were even more troubling. Nazi doctrine strictly defined women's roles as centered around Kinder, Küche, Kirche, children, kitchen, church. Soviet women flying combat missions represented a fundamental challenge to this worldview. Most concerning was the practical question. If German command had been so wrong about this, what else were they miscalculating? The response varied across command levels. Some Luftwaffe pilots reportedly requested transfers rather than continue attempting to intercept aircraft they now knew were piloted by women. Official documentation carefully avoided gender specifications. Luftwaffe Operations Order 4427, dated March 24, 1943, stated, "All references to enemy night bomber personnel in official reports shall employ standard military terminology without specific reference to gender. This directive is issued to maintain operational focus and prevent unnecessary speculation that may impact troop morale." While High Command suppressed the information, frontline soldiers developed a different relationship with their invisible tormentors. A mixture of grudging respect and superstitious fear spread through the ranks. The nickname Nachthexen, night witches, originated among common soldiers and spread rapidly, despite official discouragement of the term. Some units began requesting dedicated anti-night witch resources, while others refused to acknowledge gender entirely, focusing solely on the tactical threat. "The enemy's characteristics, not their identity, determine our response," wrote one pragmatic field commander. While German command struggled with this revelation, Nadezhda Popova continued her missions without pause. When Germans captured her comrades in February 1943, she was flying her 412th mission, completely unaware that the secret of her regiment's composition had been compromised. By the time German intelligence had confirmed the regiment's all-female status, she had already completed 431 of what would eventually become part of the regiment's 24,000 total missions. On the night of March 25, 1943, while Wehrmacht commanders debated the implications of women combat pilots, Popova led a 3-aircraft formation against a German artillery position near Novorossiysk. The mission destroyed 7 artillery pieces and an ammunition truck, killing 15 German personnel. When later informed that Germans had discovered their gender, she reportedly shrugged and replied, "We didn't fly to prove women could fight. We flew to kill fascists. Whether they knew we were women made no difference to our bombs." The discovery changed nothing operationally. The night witches continued flying, and Germans continued dying. After the war, Soviet and Allied interrogators collected testimonies from German prisoners that revealed the psychological impact of the Night Witches campaign. During prisoner processing between 1945 and 1946, interrogators routinely asked about Eastern Front experiences, including night operations. When the topic of night harassment aviation arose, interrogators noted an unexpected consistency in responses across hundreds of interviews. Even hardened SS officers showed visible reactions, a mixture of frustration, respect, and lingering disbelief, when discussing the Night Witches. The testimonies painted a picture of an enemy that had confounded conventional military doctrine. Oberleutnant Werner Schroeder, a Ju-88 night fighter pilot with NJG-4, Night Fighter Group 4, captured near Prague in May 1945, provided particularly revealing testimony. "We received orders to intercept these aircraft in August 1942. Command didn't tell us they were women. We only learned after the war ended. I attempted interception 17 times, 17 failures. The aircraft were too slow for engagement. My stall warnings would activate every time I tried to match their speed. It was humiliating. You train for years to master the Ju-88. You face British Lancaster bombers. You understand air combat. Then a wooden biplane makes you look foolish. When I learned after surrender they were women, pause in transcript. I had no words. We couldn't catch them because physics wouldn't let us. Gender was irrelevant. They had beaten the laws of aerodynamics itself." Hauptmann Fritz Hoffmann, who commanded a flak battery in eastern Ukraine, testified, "My battery fired an estimated 230,000 rounds at these aircraft between September 1942 and April 1944. We achieved perhaps 5 or 6 hits across 2 years. They would approach with engines loud. We would prepare. Then, silence. We would fire at where we thought they were, but we were shooting at ghosts. The sound would return after bombs exploded. Psychological effect on my men was severe. We feared the silence more than the bombs. Learning they were women only added to the sense that we had underestimated everything about this enemy." These testimonies revealed consistent patterns across units and sectors. The silence tactic appeared in nearly every account, with soldiers describing the profound psychological impact of hearing engines stop, knowing bombs would soon fall but unable to determine from where. Failed interceptions due to the speed differential were mentioned by every Luftwaffe pilot interrogated. The revelation of gender consistently produced reactions ranging from disbelief to grudging admiration. Many attempted to rationalize away the uncomfortable truth, suggesting that Soviet propaganda exaggerated female involvement, or that men must have flown the more difficult missions. Others admitted more directly, it made no difference. They were effective regardless of who they were. A phrase repeated in various forms across dozens of testimonies was, "We couldn't catch what we couldn't match in speed." Several prisoners mentioned specific Night Witch aircraft they had come to recognize by distinctive markings or repair patterns, admitting that German propaganda about Soviet inferiority had been fundamentally wrong. Some testimonies referenced specific Night Witches, though often without knowing their names. Lieutenant Karl Wagner, who served with the 97th Infantry Division near Kuban, recalled, "There was one aircraft we learned to recognize. Had distinctive red star marking on the right wing and multiple repair patches across the fuselage. This aircraft appeared over our positions at least twice weekly. We began calling it the Ghost because it would arrive in silence. I witnessed this aircraft's attacks 14 times personally. On April 8, 1943, it destroyed our ammunition depot. On May 23rd, it hit our command post, killing 3 officers. After the war, I learned from Soviet records this was likely Lieutenant Popova. She had flown over 850 missions as part of their regiment's 24,000 total. We never came close to shooting her down. She was untouchable. Popova was aware that Germans were capturing her comrades, though specific details of interrogations remained unknown until after the war. When two of her squadron mates failed to return from a February mission, she led 3 consecutive search missions behind enemy lines, risking capture herself. Throughout this period, she maintained her relentless operational tempo, averaging 9-12 missions per night, despite the increased risk of being specifically targeted as Germans became more aware of the regiment's tactics. By war's end, she had contributed significantly to the regiment's 24,000 missions, having personally completed over 850 combat sorties. After reviewing German POW testimonies in 1946, she offered a characteristic response. Their surprise is their own failure of imagination. We did what needed doing. Whether they respected us or feared us or were humiliated by us was their concern. Our concern was victory. The testimonies confirmed what Germans had discovered too late. The night witches weren't anomalies or propaganda. They were among the most effective tactical weapons deployed on the Eastern Front, and Nadezhda Popova was among the deadliest of them all. When the war in Europe ended on May 9, 1945, the night witches' final record stood as testament to what Germans had dismissed as impossible. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment, later redesignated as the 46th Guards Night Bomber Aviation Regiment, had completed approximately 24,000 combat missions, a number so staggering it remains unmatched in aviation history. Nadezhda Popova personally flew 852 of these missions, accumulating over 1,300 flight hours in combat conditions. During her operational period from June 1942 to May 1945, she dropped an estimated 90 tons of bombs on German positions. Most remarkably, she survived the entire war without being shot down, despite numerous close calls and aircraft riddled with bullet holes. For her extraordinary service, she received the Hero of the Soviet Union Medal, the Soviet Union's highest honor, along with 3 Orders of the Red Banner, an Order of the Red Star, and numerous campaign medals. The magnitude of Popova's achievement becomes clear when placed in context. While her 852 missions were impressive, they formed part of the regiment's astonishing 24,000 total, a testament to the operational tempo these women maintained for 3 years of continuous combat. She averaged approximately 28 missions per month throughout her service, flying through harsh Russian winters when temperatures in her open cockpit plunged to -40 degrees. She continued flying despite injuries, including severe frostbite that left permanent scars on her face and hands, and hearing damage from thousands of hours exposed to engine noise without protection. The regiment lost 32 of its approximately 80 pilots and navigators during the war, each loss felt personally by survivors in the tightly knit unit. Yet Popova and her comrades returned to the air night after night, knowing each mission could be their last, driven by determination that Germans consistently underestimated. To understand the magnitude of these numbers, context matters. The most accomplished German night fighter pilots typically completed 40-60 missions during their entire careers before being rotated to training duties or lost in combat. United States Army Air Force's bomber crews were rotated home after 25 missions, considering this the maximum psychological threshold for combat effectiveness. Popova's 852 missions represented the equivalent of 34 full American combat tours. Even among Soviet male pilots, where combat rotations were less formalized, the average bomber pilot completed between 150 to 300 missions. The regiment's average was approximately 500 to 600 missions per pilot, with Popova exceeding this by over 200. Scale comparison further illuminates her achievement. Her 852 missions exceeded the total operations of some entire bomber groups. If each mission averaged 2 hours of flight time, she spent approximately 1,700 hours, nearly 71 days, in combat flight conditions. Her bombs alone likely destroyed dozens of German vehicles, multiple ammunition dumps, and killed or wounded hundreds of enemy personnel. By any metric, Nadezhda Popova's operational record represented one of the most sustained combat performances in aviation history, and she achieved it in an aircraft Germans considered too primitive to matter. The 588th Night Bomber Regiment's collective record validated Soviet High Command's controversial decision to deploy women in combat roles. Their approximately 24,000 combat sorties resulted in over 3,000 tons of bombs dropped on German positions. Conservative estimates place German casualties from these operations at 5,000 plus killed or wounded. Material destroyed included hundreds of ammunition dumps, thousands of vehicles, and countless installations ranging from field headquarters to supply depots and artillery positions. Throughout their operational period from May 1942 to May 1945, the regiment maintained continuous operations without interruption, even during the harshest winter months when other air units were grounded. Most remarkably, despite the regiment's 32 fatalities from approximately 80 personnel, they maintained a 96.8% survival rate per mission, significantly higher than conventional Soviet bomber units, which experienced 40 or 60% survival rates. The cost-effectiveness proved equally striking. The regiment cost approximately $2 million to equip and maintain, yet inflicted damage conservatively valued at $50+ million. This validated the central paradox the Night Witches represented. The cheapest aircraft with the most unsuitable pilots yielded the highest effectiveness per ruble invested. German expenditure attempting to counter them exceeded 125 million Reichsmarks in anti-aircraft ammunition, searchlight operations, and fighter interception attempts, creating a cost ratio of 160. For every ruble Soviets invested in the Night Witches, Germans spent 60 trying to stop them. Yet despite this massive expenditure, German fighters achieved 0 confirmed aerial kills of Night Witches. Almost all their losses came from ground fire, not air combat, further confirming the stall speed paradox that protected their slow-flying aircraft. But numbers alone don't capture the strategic value the Night Witches provided. Their psychological warfare impact degraded German morale through sleep deprivation and constant harassment. More than 5,000 German soldiers were tied down in air defense roles, specifically to counter night harassment raids, personnel that could have been deployed to combat zones. Supply lines were consistently disrupted, forcing longer and more vulnerable transport routes. The propaganda value proved immeasurable, concrete proof that Soviet women could fight effectively, boosting Soviet morale while undermining German confidence. Most significantly, the Night Witches exposed fundamental flaws in German intelligence and doctrine, revealing how technological superiority could be rendered irrelevant through tactical innovation. Marshal Georgy Zhukov reportedly noted in his memoirs, "The Night Witches achieved strategic impact disproportionate to their numbers. They cost us almost nothing and cost the Germans everything they spent trying to stop them." The 588th Regiment proved that in warfare, technological superiority matters less than tactical innovation, and determination can overcome engineering. Nadezhda Popova's 852 missions, as part of the regiment's 24,000 total, embodied this principle in its purest form. After the war ended, Nadezhda Popova faced a different kind of challenge, returning to civilian life after 3 years of nightly combat. Her initial recognition came swiftly. The Hero of the Soviet Union Medal was presented in February 1945 for completing over 800 combat missions. She participated in victory parades and gave speeches about women's contributions to the war effort. Unlike many veterans, she continued in aviation, becoming a flight instructor at the Kherson Higher Aviation School, passing her knowledge to the next generation of pilots. In 1947, she married Semyon Kharlamov, a fellow pilot and hero of the Soviet Union. They had one son, born in 1949. She maintained close relationships with her surviving squadron mates, particularly Marina Raskova and Yevdokia Bershanskaya, with whom she organized annual reunions. Though initially reluctant to speak about her experiences, by the 1960s she began giving occasional interviews and participating in veterans events. When asked about combat stress, she once replied, "Every night was frightening, but we couldn't afford fear. Fear takes up too much space in the cockpit when there's important work to be done." Soviet recognition of the Night Witches fluctuated with the political climate. Under Stalin, who was wary of war heroes with independent popularity, their achievements were documented but not heavily promoted. During the Khrushchev era, more extensive accounts appeared in Soviet military history publications. By the Brezhnev period, the regiment had become a standard feature in Soviet accounts of the Great Patriotic War, with multiple medals and honors awarded retroactively to surviving members. Popova died on July 8, 2013, at age 91. In her hometown of Shabanovka, a small museum dedicated to her achievements opened in 2015, and a street was renamed in her honor. For decades, the Night Witches remained virtually unknown in the West. During the Cold War, their story was either suppressed, or dismissed as Soviet propaganda by Western military historians, focused on technological aspects of air warfare. The glasnost period of the 1980s allowed more information to emerge, though skepticism persisted. It wasn't until the 1990s that Western historians gained access to Soviet military archives, confirming the operational records that had seemed implausible. Books began appearing in the 2000s, including Anna Timofeyeva Yegorova's Red Sky, Black Death and Bruce Miles's Night Witches: The Untold Story. By the 2010s, documentaries and popular histories brought wider attention to their achievements. German POW testimonies, made available after archival declassification, provided independent validation of Soviet accounts. Museums, including the Russian Air Force Museum near Moscow and the Museum of the Great Patriotic War, created permanent exhibits honoring the Night Witches. Monuments were erected at several former airfields from which they operated. In 2021, the Russian State Duma renamed a plaza in Moscow Night Witches Square, finally giving official recognition at the national level. Several films, including Night Swallows, 2013, and Night Witches, 2018, dramatized their exploits for international audiences. The story of Nadezhda Popova and the Night Witches transcends its historical moment, offering lessons that remain relevant. About warfare, they demonstrated how asymmetric tactics can defeat technological superiority. Their canvas biplanes proved untouchable to advanced German fighters through ingenious exploitation of physics. The psychological impact of their raids far exceeded the physical damage, showing how fear and uncertainty can be weapons as effective as bombs. Their innovation in silent gliding approaches proved that creativity matters more than resources in overcoming seemingly insurmountable obstacles. About underestimation, the Germans' assumptions regarding both gender and aircraft primitiveness created a fatal blind spot. Their prejudice created vulnerabilities that Popova and her sisters exploited night after night. What Germans perceived as weakness, slow speed, canvas construction, minimal instrumentation, became the very strengths that made the Night Witches so effective. The lesson remains clear. Never dismiss a threat based on preconceptions about who your enemy is or what weapons they wield. Regarding determination, flying 24,000 missions required extraordinary resilience, especially knowing each sortie could be their last. The physical toll included frostbite, hearing loss, and exhaustion, while the psychological burden of losing comrades and witnessing destruction night after night tested even the strongest spirits. Yet they continued, night after night, for 3 years without pause. In engineering terms, the PO-2's simple design ultimately proved superior to complex German aircraft in this specific operational context. The stall speed paradox demonstrated that understanding your environment matters more than raw performance specifications. The constraints of operating with minimal resources forced innovations like the silence tactic that sophisticated engineering never considered. On April 15, 1945, when Nadezhda Popova climbed into her PO-2 for what would be among her final missions, she embodied the culmination of what the regiment had accomplished through 24,000 sorties without parachutes. The German officers who had laughed at women in crop dusters years earlier never fully grasped what they represented. Not just female pilots defying gender restrictions, but a fundamental reimagining of aerial warfare itself, through physics exploited, through canvas that wouldn't shatter, through silence more terrifying than sound, and through determination that refused to acknowledge impossibility. The Night Witches had rewritten military doctrine. Their 24,000 missions weren't just bombing runs. They were proof that the Germans had calculated everything except the one variable that mattered most, the human capacity to adapt and overcome. And in wooden biplanes that shouldn't have succeeded, against an enemy that refused to take them seriously until too late, the Night Witches proved that sometimes the most deadly weapon isn't the most powerful one. It's the one your enemy never believes exists until it's directly overhead.